Welcome to the M&A Unplugged podcast. Our mission is to help you be better prepared for your business acquisition or sale. Being prepared will ensure you maximize returns and minimize risks. This is M&A Unplugged with your host, Dominic Rinaldi.
Welcome back to M&A Unplugged. I'm your host, Dominic Rinaldi. So I'm recording this episode the week of Memorial Day and want to take a moment to have a shout out to all of our service personnel who have served our country and given so much so that we can have such unbelievable freedoms. So thankful for all that they do for us. So we're going to re-release an episode that has been one of the most listened to episodes and one that really resonates and should resonate with both buyers and sellers. And it's what drives value in a business. And obviously the numbers matter. And unfortunately, it's the thing that most people focus on, and they don't focus on the soft issues of what really goes into determining how you evaluate those numbers and what sort of multiples should be applied and whether or not you should be aggressive with multiples or you should back off of multiples. And we have seen since we released this episode an incredible number of downloads and a lot of traction, and really believe that both buyers and sellers can benefit tremendously from this episode. So we wanted to re-release it. Hope you enjoy it. If you've listened to it again, I think it's a great reminder. If you haven't, certainly a great episode to listen to. Hope you all have a wonderful or had a wonderful Memorial Day week. And before we get into this episode, I want to remind everybody, if you want to avoid the common deal pitfalls and the risk of losing substantial dollars, you need to know how ready you really are to buy a business. Because I believe proper preparation is so critical to your deal success, we've published a catalog of free resources to help you be better prepared. You can access all of these resources on our website at K2advisor/resources. That's K, the number 2, advisor.com/resources. Being prepared is critical to ensuring that you maximize your returns and you minimize your risks. As always, thank you for being here and hope you enjoyed today's episode. So every business has value drivers, and these are things that can move the value of a business up or down, some cases pretty substantially. And there are generic value drivers versus industry-specific value drivers. But today, I'm going to focus on the most common value drivers, things that you should be looking at whenever you're evaluating a business. And just as a reminder, I talk to people often about what they should be looking for when they're out there looking at businesses at a very high level. And I always caution people, if you're looking for a perfect business, there isn't one. And you actually don't want a perfect business. You want a business that has upside, things that you can bring your skills and your experience to improve and take to the next level. The other things are, you want to be careful of buying a business that has to compete with big tech. If you buy a business where you're going to have to go toe to toe with Amazon or Google or any of the other big technology companies, I would really think twice about that acquisition. Outsourcing threats. If you've got a business that provides a service or a product that could potentially be outsourced, you're going to be in a race to the bottom. Companies in China and Malaysia and India can do things much cheaper than we can do them here. So you have to be careful about looking at target companies that might ultimately have the opportunity to have their services or products outsourced. And then the last one is union versus non-union. And by the way, this is not an indication as to whether or not I would buy a union versus non-union business, because union businesses are perfectly fine, but you have to go in eyes wide open, because if you're going to buy a union shop, you need to have advisors who really understand unions and look at a couple of aspects of that. And the prime one is the union that you're going into. If there's a pension, is there any unfunded liability in that pension? And if so, you want to make sure that that unfunded pension liability is cured before you take over the business. Again, this is an area where you really need experts to come in and advise you before you go down that path. Okay, with that said, let's dive into value drivers. First one, no surprise, financials. Financials are critically important, obviously, but it's the quality of the financials. And so what do I mean by that? When an owner of a business presents their financials to you, are they clean? Are these financials really showing the true picture of what the business is doing month in and month out, year in and year out? And so how do you know if you're getting clean financials? Pretty simply, you could be looking at a profit and loss statement and looking at what the categories of expenses are. Are they capturing everything? Are there lots of discretionary expenses that are going through the business? And if so, in what form are those discretionary expenses being put through the business? And are they things that you can ultimately be considering its cash flow to you when you take over the business? The balance sheet, too, I would mention, is something that needs particular attention. I've seen a lot of balance sheets over the last couple of decades that don't really accurately reflect what's happening in the business. And some of the big culprits are inventory, where people are not accurately reflecting inflows and outflows in inventory. So you really can't get to what's happening on the balance sheet and how much money is really needed to run that business. And loans, receivables and payables, how closely are those managed? How accurate are they? Is there bad debt? So you need to really look at what are the quality of the financials. And the better the quality, the cleaner those financials, the higher the value of that business, because the easier it is to get that business financed if you need to go get a loan. The next value driver is recurring revenues. These are revenues that are consistently produced month in, month out. It's very different than repeat revenues. The perfect example of a recurring revenue business are insurance companies. People who sell insurance get monthly premiums off, get monthly commissions off of the premiums. That's a recurring business model. A lot of financial planners work on the same model. They'll get a percentage of your portfolio on a monthly or quarterly basis. That's the true definition of recurring revenue. Very different than repeat revenues, where you know you're going to get clients back in some infrequent basis. When companies have recurring revenue, it really drives the value of a business up, because there's some consistency there. You can really rely on those revenues coming in, hopefully really on a monthly basis. The next value driver is owner involvement. So when you look at a business and you're analyzing it, one of the key components is how much time and effort does the current owner put into that business? Is the owner involved in lots of the decisions day in and day out? Or is the owner removed from the business? And does the business operate without their involvement? One of my litmus tests on owner involvement is, can that owner take a month off and go somewhere and not have to be involved in the business at all? If that's the case, then you know you have a business that's fairly turnkey. And when you're walking into a turnkey business, the value of that business goes way up because it's not dependent on that owner. Chances are the owner is not out there leading the sales efforts, not involved with clients, obviously setting strategic direction and managing the business from a strategic level. But you want to be careful that they don't have their hands in the weeds, because if they do, that really drives value down. The risk goes way up when you take over that business, that owner was so involved that there's going to be some hiccups during transition. And so those types of companies tend to get a lower value. Client acquisition process. How easy is it for that company to generate new clients and keep the clients they have? So in order to understand this, you really need to look at the sales and marketing capabilities of that company. Do they have a good, solid sales program and salespeople that are out there generating business on a regular basis? And is the marketing function behind those salespeople generating good brand awareness and generally generating leads for that sales organization? And is it all working like a well-oiled machine? And then what are the costs of generating those sales? So you want to be analyzing that client acquisition process to see how solid it is, what the cost of maintaining it is. And obviously, if it's a well-oiled machine, you're going to look at paying a little bit higher value for a business like that versus if you have to come in and build a sales and marketing machine or retool what's there today. The next value driver is the quality of the employees. So when I look at the employee base, I'm looking at how long are people there at the company? What's the turnover rate? Are there any choke points in the employee base? So what do I mean by that? Are there one or two employees that if they weren't there, the business would come to a screeching halt? Much in the same way I talked about the owner being maybe so involved in the business that if they go away, the business stops. You want to be looking at analyzing that business to see if there are any employees that are potential choke points in the business. Perfect scenario there is that everybody is cross-trained and no one person has all of the keys to the kingdom. I'll give you a perfect example of this. We had a recent client who had a CFO who really was the only one who knew how to close the books at the end of the month. And that CFO recently resigned. No surprise, that business came to a screeching halt. They had to pull in an expert from the outside. Took a couple of weeks for that expert to get their arms around the business and start getting the books closed on a regular basis. So you want to be looking for things like that in a potential target company to see if there's risks. The other thing is, how autonomous are the employees? Do they need the owner's permission for every decision or everything that they want to do? Or do the employees have a fair amount of autonomy to take risks? Obviously calculated risks and nothing that's going to put the business in jeopardy, but risks nonetheless, which will actually feed into culture. You'll see that when the employee base operates somewhat autonomous, that there's generally a pretty good culture. It means that there's trust in the business and the owner really trusts those folks to operate the business day in and day out. And the last thing I'll mention is non-solicitations. I'm not mentioning non-competes because non-competes are really hard to enforce, but you should be looking to see if the employees have non-solicits. To the extent that they do, the business has non-solicits, the value of that business goes up because that means is those employees can't just leave and then go target the clients or the vendors of the company. So these are all the things when you're analyzing the employee base to determine, does the value go up or does it go down based on some of these? The next thing is clients. The first thing I'm looking at when I'm evaluating and analyzing the client base is, are there any concentrations? So does any one client represent more than 10%, 15% of the company's revenues? No surprise here. If the company does have one or two clients that represent more than that, I'm probably decreasing value a bit for this one component. But I'm also looking at what's the longevity of those clients. What's the satisfaction level of those clients? Oftentimes you can go online and look at surveys or reviews to see what the satisfaction level is. And if you can't determine that because the business really doesn't operate in a public way, if you're really serious about the business, one of the things you can do is ask the owner, if you get far enough down the road in diligence, to do a third-party satisfaction survey with the clients. Obviously, that would need to be masked. Nobody needs to know that the business is for sale, but it's a good way to test whether or not the clients are satisfied. And the other thing you want to know is, are those clients under contract? And what are the terms and conditions of those contracts? Can they be easily broken with 30 days notice? Or are there some penalties in the contracts that really tie the clients to the business, but in a good way? The next thing that you want to be analyzing, the next value driver, is what are the growth prospects for that business and that industry? So has the company built a foundation that you then can come into and grow to the next level? And what are the overall industry prospects? Is this an industry that's on the rise? Is it stable and mature and growing at a very low rate? Or are there some headwinds in that industry that may mean that you're going to have to retool that company in the next 2, 3, 5 years and diversify to accommodate for some of those headwinds? So understanding all of these things should go into factoring where the ultimate value shakes out. The next value driver that I like to look at is barriers to entry. Quite simply, how easy is it for competitors to enter that industry? And as you can imagine, there's some industries where there's very low barriers to entry. Anybody can set up shop and all of a sudden you have a new competitor. Whereas there are others that either have patents in place or processes in place, or they service such a specific niche that the barriers to entry are really high. And obviously when they're high, you're going to be giving that business a little bit more consideration when it comes to value. Next value driver I'm looking at is vendors. So same as clients, I'm looking at concentrations here. Is the business tied to one or maybe two vendors such that if those vendors decided to tighten up credit, or in the case that I just had recently with a client, they had a vendor pull their product line for them completely, and that product line represented about 40% of that client's business. So overnight, 40% of our client's business went away, and now they're scrambling to replace that vendor, which is going to take some time. So you want to be really careful when you're looking at vendors in the company. Are there concentrations? How long have those relationships been around? What are the terms of those relationships if you were to take it over? And obviously, if the vendor base is diversified and there's lots of vendors that the company has, and maybe they're focused on one vendor at the moment, but you know that there's multiple vendors that they could be using, then you're looking at value a bit differently there. The next thing is infrastructure. So what's the infrastructure of the business? The quality of the systems and the processes that the owner has put in place. Believe it or not, you're going to come across businesses when you're out there searching that don't really have good systems and don't have processes. You're going to decrease value for that. But where there are good systems in place and there's documented processes, maybe even an owner's manual or a manual that gives you sort of the footprint, operations manual on how the business operates day in and day out. When owners have taken the time to do that, it's an indication they've taken time to do lots of other things right in the business. And I always love when I see that in a business. So that infrastructure really matters. And again, will determine whether or not you're decreasing or increasing value. I mentioned this earlier, but key performance indicators. What are the benchmarks in that industry? So for example, what are the common cost of goods sold in that industry? And using that as a benchmark, and then comparing the business that you're looking at to what the industry benchmarks are. What's the cost of labor for a business like that? And then looking at what the cost of labor percentages are in your target company, seeing and comparing how that business operates to industry benchmarks. And there's any number of benchmarks that you need to be identifying. Again, this is somewhat of an industry specific item. And there's lots of ways to get these industry benchmarks, lots of research reports out there. And if you have a good advisory team, they should have access to many of these industry reports. The other thing is financeability. So is that business financeable? And this goes back to the quality of the financials. If the business has really good, clean books and records, and the quality of those financials are exceptional, it's going to be very easy to take those financials to a bank and secure a loan to acquire the business. But if those financials are not in great shape and it doesn't really depict the what's happening in the business, it's going to be much harder for a bank to get behind providing a loan on that business. And so one of two things happens here. One, either the value of the business goes down because the banks lose interest or confidence in that business, or you're not going to be able to get a bank behind the deal at all. And maybe you're going to have to ask the seller to finance this business because the business financials really aren't in a condition that you could take it to a third-party lender. And then the last item is a grab bag of miscellaneous things that I'm not going to go through, but this is where it really gets specific to a business. So what are the ongoing capital requirements of that business? And no surprise here, the more capital required to operate a business, the lower the value of that business, because that means you're going to have to take more dollars out of your pocket to maintain the business and grow the business. What's the legal history of that business? Does that business have a history of lawsuits and workers' comp claims, or is it a pretty clean business and there really aren't legal issues inherent in the business? Will drive the value up or down. Patents, whether or not the patents have been perfected, the quality of those patents, how long is left in those patents is something to be looking at, which again will drive value. And technology. What is the underlying technology that the business operates on? Does it have to be upgraded in any time in the next 2 to 3 years? Or is it solid and can it accommodate growth into the future? So as you can imagine, you're pulling together all of these value drivers after you analyze them, and you're sort of doing a check mark of up and down arrows. One area might be driving value up, another area might be driving value down. And you have to take all of these value drivers into consideration and look at it on a holistic basis so you can determine really where does the value range, and every business has a range, where does the value range come out for a business like that? I'm going to cover how you actually arrive at value in more detail in a future podcast, and how value drivers fits into the overall trend and how you use it as a data point in looking at the whole business. And this is where an experienced deal team by your side can be invaluable. Having people who have done lots of deals, who understand all of these things and how they drive value up and down is really critical. So you need to surround yourself with M&A experts who have been through it many times and have a track record of success. If, however, you're in the middle of a deal now and you need some help analyzing a business or understanding, maybe where that value range is, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help you think through that. And I also urge you to take advantage of the free buyer acquisition assessment on our resources page at K2 Advisor. This assessment was designed to help you understand how ready you really are to buy a business and where the gaps might exist so that you can close those gaps and really get ready to get out in the marketplace and acquire a business that's really right for you. And if you would like to reach out and learn more about how we can help you on your business ownership journey, please fill out the contact form on our website and we'll be in touch. I hope you enjoyed this episode. All of today's information will be available in the show notes. If you enjoy our content, please remember to subscribe and review our podcast. I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the M&A Unplugged podcast. And until then, please remember that scaling, acquiring, or selling a business takes time, preparation, and the proper knowledge.